Hey everybody, welcome to tonight's show. It's me and Tim.
How you doing? How you doing? We're doing our discussing of. I always get messed up with the echo. Like there's a delay and there's always like an echo
Oh
afterwards.
yeah,
That's why I have to
yeah,
mute myself immediately. So fun times. So yeah, we're going to be discussing Sylvia Likens' case. Basically going through. Tony brought attention to this case to me. I think like about 2 weeks ago, with the whole Ohio thing. Train derailment kind of set this back. But we're going to be talking about this case. It's interesting because it kind of it's definitely goes into territory of like why did they do it. A lot of it's considered a very horrible case. Um, and it's definitely before we get started, definitely trigger warnings at certain parts of this particular story. But yeah, we're going to get into the Sylvia Likens case. It's pretty famous, and we're going to get started soon. I remember the case very well. It's horrific. Yes, it is.
yeah. It's a horrible case, and it's not. They always say that Juno Faruko, and
Yeah.
Sylvia Likens are kind of like
Well,
bonding spirits because they went through almost the exact kind of horror.
I mean, the only difference is that Sylvia Likens was never sexually assaulted. She died as a
No, she was.
no. I heard from multiple videos that she was never actually. She was still a
No,
virgin.
no, no. Nobody actually assaulted her, but all the kids
Yeah, they
did.
watched her dance
And
nude. Yeah.
well, no. And she also took Gertrude. We're jumping ahead, but Gertrude forced her to masturbate with a Pepsi Cola bottle. So
Yeah.
she was penetrated, but in the sense of an actual, like a penis, no.
Yeah. So obviously that's going to be your warning that this is going to get dark. But anyway,
Yes,
let's get started.
this is very dark. Trigger warning. This is about child abuse and caretakers, and but this also takes place
65.
back in 1965. And before we start with the story of Sylvia, I think it was a good idea to touch on who Gertrude was. Uh, Benaziski.
Benaziski.
Benaziski. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Well, you're
Um,
probably, I mean, like instead of butchering her name, you're better off just saying her first name and then.
well, everybody and in the court documents referred to her as Gertie. So, for the sake of this show, we're going to refer to her to Gertie. So Gertrude, aka Gertie, her early life we're going to talk about right now. She was a resident of Indianapolis, Indiana, USA. She was also known as Gertrude Wright through a previous quote unquote marriage.
Tony, one moment. Maybe you want to switch the photos to that woman.
Okay, hold on one second. It's going to take a second.
Yeah. So this is Sylvia Likens. That's the photo before, and now we're going to switch to Gertie. Hi, Queen Bella. Hi, Bash, the Tragedy Pimps, Grandma Sherry, and Steph B.
Hey, welcome everybody. This is Gertie here, and this was taken during the whole court procedure.
Okay.
Okay. She was also known as Gertrude Wright through quote unquote previous marriage. Gertie was born Gertrude von Fossen in 1929, the third child of six. There isn't much to know about her childhood except she shared an extremely close bond with her father, but had a frigid relationship with her mother. Yes, I am reading from a script. I just thought it was easier to do it this way than to wing it, so please bear with me. 5 years after Gertie's father's passed away, he had a heart attack in front of her. She witnessed her father dying in 1940. She quit school and she was 16 at this time. At 16, she married an 18-year-old deputy, John Brananowski, hence the last name. And with him, she had 4 children. But John had a violent temper, beating and harming his wife, who he claims for annoying him. This was a quote from himself. Annoying him. The two stayed together for 10 years before divorcing. Gertie got custody of all four of her children. Within the year of her divorce from John, she met and married a man named Edward Guthrie. There's a lot of names here. There's a lot of characters who did divorce her after 3 months due to quote unquote being tired of having her children around. So Gertie doesn't meet the best of men, it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shortly after Edward, Gertie and John, her first husband, remarried. They stayed together for another 7 years and had 2 more children, making the total of children 6. John and Gertie divorced finally in 1963. Around this time, Gertie was 37 years old and began an affair. She had an affair with a 23-year-old named Dennis Lee Wright. That's how she gets her other name of Gertie Wright. Legally, they're not married, but you'll find out why. But Dennis was like John in many ways and abused her violently. She became pregnant by him twice, suffering one miscarriage, assumed as a result of Dennis's violent tendencies, and given birth to only one child, bringing the total of children to 7. Shortly after Dennis abandoned Gertie and the children, she was left with 7 children and occasionally a child support payment from John for the 6 kids that she had with him, which was very unreliable. So not only was Gertie going through all this torment, but she was also going through poverty. They were very, very poor, and she was a single mother of 7. Mind you, none of this excludes what she did. This is just an inside of what she has gone through.
Yeah, you're trying to get into the mind of the person a little bit by going through their background.
Yes. Okay. Gertie would perform odd jobs around town, such as babysitting, if you can laugh at that, and doing other people's laundry for them. Gertie did have major financial issues. It's very well known. 7 kids, a house to keep up, and a reputation to keep up. Gertie, and at this time, too, of the Sylvia Likens issue that came up, Gertie had a 17-year-old daughter, Paula, who was also associated with the crime of murdering Sylvia, was 3 months pregnant by a fling with a middle-aged married man. So we can see the direction that they're going through.
Yeah, I mean, it's not good. It definitely gets to the mind of a woman that seems to be kind of has no power over her life. In the moment she gets power over someone, she abuses it.
Oh, definitely.
And then she uses, and later on you're going to see what she does to excuse her actions, in which she tortured and abused a 16-year-old child.
Yeah.
Well, you can, but it's pretty interesting to get into it. And also, what makes this case very interesting, and I know we're jumping a little ahead, is that there are not only a whole families involved with participation of of torture, but also neighborhood kids. This really gets to kind of, you wonder what is like, obviously you might say the woman's evil. You might say the woman's children being raised could be raised to have a warped morality. But then when you wonder about the children in the neighborhood, it does really, you want to think about what is the actual reason for this. And there are historical examples, and we'll get into that. But that's why I find this case very interesting. And I guess we can continue with the bio of this woman before we get into the actual Sylvia Likens, if you want to.
Yeah. Through the abuse and poor finances and the mental abuse and living situation, Gertie's physical and mental health was declining. She had a number of unidentified mental illnesses. Mind you, this was back in the 60s.
Yes.
So mental illness awareness wasn't there, and nobody knew as much as we know now. So many unidentified.
I mean, and also you have to realize that to have a mental illness was to be shamed.
Yes.
A lot of times you would have situations where, let's say you had a relative that might have had Down syndrome or some sort of mental illness. Sometimes they would sort of hide them. They would hide them from public sight. Another interesting concept to think about in the 60s is that our concept of child abuse is completely different from back in the 60s.
Oh yeah.
Today, you spank someone with a paddle, that's child abuse. Back then, they called that good parenting. A lot
Yeah.
of parents would just do the paddle. So, I mean, so this might play into why it slowly escalated from what it is, because the norm back then could be that. That was kind of what they did a lot of times. Was it?
Exactly.
And of course, parents learned to not do that, and it got better. But that's 1965 for you. There was a lot of things going on in 1965 that was not good, and
Mm.
that was just one of them. So I guess you can continue.
Yes. Yeah. Back then it was basically deny, 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 put on a smile and carry on
Yeah.
type deal. She also stopped practicing basic hygiene. She barely ate. She was literally a skeleton, and she smoked more than she could afford. She was a bigger smoker than me, who is a big smoker.
Yeah.
Um, she claims she married Dennis Wright. We're going back to Dennis here, where she had one child with. But she only did this to keep the appearance up of not having a bastard child and not being a quote unquote whore. So basically, her and Dennis were never married. It was just said that they were married because she was big on her appearance, believe it or not. Very big on how the
Uh,
neighborhood and the church perceived her. Right,
and it's
right,
right. Yes, it's
right,
right.
right. Dennis Wright. Sorry. She had a thing for keeping up with appearances. In the same hand, her children could never do anything wrong. It is unclear if the children were witness to the abuse from both their biological father or stepfather, but many assume they did witness these things, which led to Sylvia's murder. So the kids could have been really exposed to the abuse that happened. The household was never a happy household, it seems.
Yeah, it does seem very chaotic. It does seem to be a situation where um, they're like, I don't know. I guess their morals kind of got warped by this woman who's by our accounts probably had a very difficult life. But that doesn't excuse her actions. But it
No.
does explain a little bit. She also appears to want care about what other people think about her, and she does seem very religious. Um, I wonder if that was more of a I wonder if that was like a front or if she actually believed it. Personally, I don't know. It would go into the mind of the person, but it just is very interesting to see. I mean, like when you actually see the pictures of this little girl, you do wonder how any sane person would be able to abuse a child to that extent, allow others to abuse it, and then excuse it with Christianity, when that's the complete opposite of any scriptures you read about Christianity when it comes to how you're supposed to treat others and and all that stuff.
No.
That's why, I mean, jumping ahead, that's why they try to do it. I think insane aside, like some sort of insanity defense, trying to claim that this lady was
Oh, they
crazy.
did. They did.
But that's jumping ahead. But she failed horribly because
Oh yeah.
luckily, was she an abusive to any of her children?
Um, their basic. I mean, define abuse. It was not abuse from what Sylvia's had. If one of her kids did something obviously wrong, she would, pop them. But she never gave her children the same treatment that Sylvia got.
Yeah, I mean, also you have to realize the concept of abuse has evolved to as today. So she had no issues of popping her kid and hitting them, which we would consider absolutely abuse, but back then it was called spare the rod, spoil the child type of deal. So, I mean, in my opinion, I think she did abuse her kids, but
Mm,
that's because I'm a person from the 21st century who's looking
yeah.
back at the 20th century and like, what the fuck's going on here?
Yeah.
But But if you ask someone in the 1960s, does she abuse her kids around that time, they probably say no. So
Yeah.
obviously, times have changed.
No, she did not abuse them, Seal, like how she did Sylvia.
No, she didn't
No.
do it to that extent. No,
Yeah.
but
No, no,
she,
no. Her
but
kids could never do wrong in her eyes as well.
but I'm saying like spankings or stuff like that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's what I meant.
That's
Like
abusive. To me too. We're in the same generation. To me that's abusive too.
that's what I mean. Like and I think being in an environment where this woman is bringing other men in seems to have a very weird moral compass with Christianity. I don't think those children were raised in a normal environment. Let's just
No.
say.
No, they were not. And to Gertie, it was keeping up the appearance which she had with the church because she was involved in the church. But I think it was more because of the food drives, the free food, the picnic and stuff. I personally think she was not all, holy and stuff. I think she just used what the church was willing to give her since she was in this poverty state. Do you
Yeah,
get what I'm saying? Because
yeah,
she
I
never
get.
went to church, but the kids did. Do you know?
Yeah, and I guess you can continue if you want to continue.
Okay, now that we read a little bit about Gertie, we're going to get to Sylvia and do a little background on her before we get into the case. This is
You want to switch up the photo of Sylvia now?
That's what I'm doing now.
Okay, good.
I'm trying to.
Tony's doing all the work today, so
Oops, shit! I got the wrong photo. Please bear with me, guys. It's very different from doing this type of thing on Streamlabs than it was on than it is on StreamYards.
I'm sure people understand. Don't worry.
Here is Sylvia. And we're going to do a basic background of Sylvia. Again, all this information was found on Wikipedia and
Wikipedia and Murderpedia and
and
those.
yeah, on those sites. So you can look them up and they're there. She was Sylvia was born January 3rd, 1948, but she was murdered on October 26th, 1965. She was 16 years old. She was the third of 5 children born to carnival workers, Lester Cecil Likens and his wife Elizabeth Betty Francis. She was born between 2 sets of fraternal twins, which is very rare. Fraternal twins. Danielle and Diana, older twins, and Benny and Jenny, 1 year younger. So that's very rare. So there was a lot of kids going on there. She had a sister who witnessed the torture Gertie and her children did to Sylvia, along with neighborhood kids inflicted on her. Jenny. Her name is Jenny. Jenny suffered from polio, and her legs were weaker than normal. She had a limp, and she was set to wear braces. Jenny is alive today. Her friends and family called Sylvia Cookie. That was her nickname. Sylvia would help her family out and work odd jobs as a teenager, performing ironing chores for friends and neighbors, running errands, or babysitting. It was said that she would give her mother some of her earnings to help around the house. Very responsible child for her age. She lost a front tooth while playing, quote unquote, roughhousing with her brothers, which made her hide her teeth when she smiled, not liking the way her teeth looked, but she still had a warm smile. She was fond of the Beatles. She loved the Beatles and very protective of her sister Jenny. You want to say something?
Oh, are you gonna say the condition Jenny was in? What
I
her
already did.
condition?
I already did. Jenny
Oh,
had polio, and
yeah.
and she had braces.
Hi, voices.
Hello. On several occasions, the two sisters would visit a local skating rink where Sylvia would help Jenny skate by holding her hand while Jenny skate on her unaffected foot, which I thought was something we needed to know. She cared about her sister so much that she would put on Jenny's strong foot. She would put a roller skate on the strong foot and help Jenny roller skate so she felt included. Sylvia was a loving child and had a bright future ahead of her until Gertie met her father, Lester. So this is where things are going to start getting rough.
Yeah,
And
and
go
I
ahead.
guess one thing I don't think maybe people are not familiar with polio, um, but because it was like almost eradicated from the first world countries, but it's a pretty bad situation where like it's transmitted through water, and food, and it makes like kind of like a situation where a person becomes sick and they become very weak when it comes to walking. Um, they have to be in bed a lot. And it can be like spinal cord causing paralysis. It's not a great condition. It's a very very bad condition. Luckily, a lot of the first world countries got rid of it through vaccines and stuff like that. But yes, that was used to be widespread.
Yeah.
So 60s it started dwindling a lot, like going down a lot more. But yeah, it's just not good.
Yeah. Thank you, Grandma Sherry, too, by the way. Yes, very big trigger warning. We're going to slowly trickle down to the actual abuse soon. So this is when Sylvia and Gertie met. During July 4th holiday, the sisters, Jenny and Sylvia, moved into 3850 East New York Street due to the father's orders. Sylvia's mother, who was just released from jail for shoplifting, and that is when her father Lester met Gertie through a church service. They got to quote unquote talking, and Lester thought it would be a good idea if the girls would board with Gertie and her kids while he and Elizabeth rekindle their marriage. He found work with Elizabeth at an East Coast carnival. He promised Gertie $20 a week for the care of both of his daughters, Sylvia and Jenny. So basically, Gertie needs the money. The parents need to take care. They need to work. They didn't want to pull their kids out of, church and the school that they're in there. But working in a carnival, you're going places. You don't normally stay in one
Yeah,
place back then.
and you have to realize that you might say, "Oh, $20 to take care of two children." Back then, that would be like almost two. I think I typed in the rate of inflation. That would be the equivalent of $202, basically,
Yeah,
of
it was a
spending
lot of
power.
money.
So it wasn't like he just gave her no money to raise these kids, and this was, the money that she gave, and he probably gave it to this woman because she presented herself as a Christian person. He probably
Mhm.
wanted them to be raised in a stable environment. Obviously, working as a carney was probably not a stable environment. Let's just say.
No.
So that's my guess, and that's my opinion on that thought.
Yeah. But he had no idea. That
Yeah,
that I mean, things back then were very lax that, you think you know someone type deal, but you really don't. It's not like Lester and Gertie had a personal relationship where they knew each other. He took a gamble and lost, basically.
yeah. I mean, the woman fooled everyone.
Oh yeah.
You're going to hear stories about how she fooled other people, and she relied on lies and deceit and her reputation to do so.
Yeah.
But I guess she can continue. Just want to stop there.
No, no, you're good. During the first week or two, the girls were treated well, with little discipline or abuse. Sylvia and her sister got along well with Gertie's kids during this time. They did what teenager girls would do. They went to church. They did as they were told. They went to school and did they did weekend church picnics. For this short time, everything felt right until it didn't anymore. Lester did agree to give Gertie $20 a week in exchange for boarding his two daughters, but the 2 weeks passed, and he was late on the third week's payment. The issue is he did send the money, but the mail system was late, being 2 to 3 days later than normal. But Gertie saw this as Lester disrespecting her, which led to the start of the abuse against Sylvia.
Hi,
And
Ruru.
hello, I know the story. It's hard. Yeah, I know. It's
Do
it's
you think that was like the trigger? Like she's been disrespected by men her entire life,
yeah,
Gertie, and then suddenly she feels like she's being disrespected by another man,
yeah,
raising children that are not even hers, and then feeling kind of like here's another man having them me raise their children for basically free, and now the only people that you could take it out on is these children that she has, like she's
yeah.
watching.
Yeah, because she has no emotional bond with these kids whatsoever. Like they have only known her for like 3, 4 weeks at this time.
That is
They've
an interesting one. That is an interesting thought.
so yeah, so I think this is what probably, you know, she had no control, but she did have control over these girls, sadly, and there was no one there to help them.
Yeah, yeah. I could see why possibly that she kind of this was the triggering event for why she kind of focused on these kids based on that event. Where did this happen? BC asked.
This happened in Indiana.
This was in 1965. This case.
Yeah.
That's a lot of anger, though. That's absolutely a lot of anger. But you know what? It's a slow burn. It's, at first small and then slowly graduates and grows bigger and bigger. That's how a lot of abuse cases like this kind of start out. Is what it is. IMO, the mom doesn't see them as well as she thinks of the kids as less humans, if you get what I'm saying. Yeah,
Yeah,
agreed.
absolutely.
You could continue. And no, you didn't.
Okay.
I don't think. I think we might have missed stating where it was from. Maybe, or I missed heard it. I didn't hear it. Maybe we forgot to put down the location where this incident occurred. Um,
Indiana.
yeah, but thank you for pointing that out, BC. Sorry about that, guys.
Um okay, continuing on. Didn't get the money in time. In response to not getting the money in time, she is quoted by saying, this is an actual quote, "Well, I took care of you two little bitches for a week for nothing." And then she paddled both sisters. She had a paddle with holes in it, and it gets graphic, so I'm just gonna say paddle. You want the nitty gritty graphics? Please go to the Wikipedia. I'm trying to make this very not triggered, so it's really hard to considering the case.
Yeah.
Um, Now the times are gonna. It seems like it's gonna start picking up now. So again, trigger warning. At this one time in August, Paula, Gertie's oldest daughter, told her mother the sisters, Jenny and Sylvia, were eating too much food at the church supper that the whole household attended, except Gertie, obviously. What isn't being said is Gertie would feed her kids first, and whatever scraps were left over, Jenny and Sylvia would get. Sometimes it was nothing at all. Gertie was still living in poverty at this time, so food was scarce. Due to Paula saying this, Sylvia and Jenny were beaten 15 times with the paddle. Sylvia takes most of the hitting in protecting her sister. So Sylvia would step in and say, "Okay, you give me her
Now,
weapons."
the question I have for you is the church meals. Would that be like something where other people outside the house would be invited?
It's like a church picnic.
Okay, so
It
she
was
was
like a church picnic.
embarrassed about the fact that these kids were eating so much and it affected her actual image that she built
Yes.
up.
Yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
that makes sense. Voodoo says that's going to be hard, Tony. I'll just say major trigger warnings. Yes,
Yes,
unfortunately,
absolutely.
I mean, like we cover cases that are when we do cover some cases, they're usually they're closed cases most of the times, but they are very very dark cases. And it's mostly because we like to discuss like cases that are very interesting. This case really interests me because of the kind of the mass thinking aspect. How can a normal family in a neighborhood suddenly commit together an act of evil and torture? And kind of is an interesting thought to get into of, like, can anyone do this? Can any group of people do this? Is it possible? And we'll get into that. But
Mhm.
we got to lay down the bones first. We got to lay down the foundation so you get an understanding of the story. But you can continue.
Yeah, that's what churches do. They yeah, exactly, voodoo. And thank you again, Grandma. By mid-August, Gertie had begun to focus her abuse exclusively upon Sylvia, with her primary motivation likely being jealous of the girl's youth, appearance, respectability, and also potential in a better future than Gertie never had. And this is true through therapy and stuff, which she had to do through court and prison, obviously. some of those things did come up. So that's kind of a little bit of what was in Gertie's mind. She saw Sylvia as a threat.
Well, you have to think of it in terms of this person's mind. This person's
Yeah.
raising multiple kids, been through two men, basically had children out of wedlock, it seemed like, which was a very big, shameful thing. She was poor, single mother,
Hmm.
um, and she basically definitely had huge self-esteem issues, and she sees a younger woman who has the potential to have everything she cannot have, and to some women it fuels their anger towards them, and you see that a lot in society. You don't see it to the extent of what's going to happen now, but it's a definitely it definitely kind of gets into the mind of a person. It might have been the actual fuel for the rage that she
Yeah.
had. But you go. You can continue.
No, I agree with you. Also, in late August, Sylvia was subjected to humiliation when she claimed to have a boyfriend in Long Beach, whom she had met in the spring of 1965. Basically, the spring that year is when she met Gertie. Before boarding with Gertie, Gertie asked her, quote unquote, these are quotes, asked her, "Ever done anything with a boy?" To which Sylvia, unsure of what Gertie was meaning, replied, "I guess so," with a question mark, and explained that she had gone skating with boys uh, there and had once mentioned that she had once laid under the covers with her boyfriend. Hearing this, Gertie asked, quote unquote, "Why did you do that, Sylvia?" And Sylvia replied, "I don't know," and shrugged. Several days later, Gertie returned to the subject with Sylvia, telling her, quote unquote, "You're certainly getting big in the stomach, Sylvia. It looks like you're going to have a baby." Horrible thing to say to a kid that doesn't even comprehend what sex is. Sylvia thought Gertie was kidding with her and said, quote unquote, "Yeah, it sure is getting big. I'm just going to have to go on a diet." And at this time, Sylvia was a virgin. She was a virgin. So let that soak in. It's a gradual trickle down to the abuse, gradual, and when it comes, it's like a you get sideswiped. On another occasion, the family ate oh, sorry, excuse me. On another occasion, as the family ate supper, Gertrude, Paula, and a neighborhood boy named Randy Gordon Leopard force fed Likens a hot dog overloaded with condiments, including mustard, ketchup, and spices. Sylvia vomited as a result and was later forced to consume what she had regurgitated. Some claim this happened later. Other claims in the report this happened when Paula told Gertie about the church picnic. Uh, so basically, this was a red flag.
Well, it seems like a slow boil of events. Basically, it seems like when the mother, Gertie,
Yeah,
proceeded to not protect her, kind of like just, gave an okay, it allowed everyone else to basically kind of get the okay from her and proceed with their bullying at first and then continue to become abuse. Let me see what voices said. And now you know why I don't eat, can't eat salad. Yeah, I won't eat salad. Warning, I get worse than this. Deep breaths. Yeah, it does get worse, but it's interesting because the reason why I think it kind of like these stories kind of are good to get into because it kind of goes with today's situations, and you can see small extents like this, like like you see like crowds. Let's say, I mean, we're gonna jump a little bit,
yeah. Go ahead.
but let's say like Dolly or Betty, and people wonder like, oh, how could groups of people dox and hurt families and stuff like that, and it goes to a group thing type of thing. Now, this is obviously a more extreme version, but by learning about cases and understanding cases, you can somewhat understand the psychology of people and crimes. And I think that's a very good thing to do, to, for your future. Even if you don't do true crime and you just want to have an understanding of people, it's good to understand that. And also, it's good to remember um, the victims and to hopefully, people don't forget about the victims and that uh, their stories actually continue, because their lives did matter, and they
Hmm.
did matter that their story gets continuously told, and that's another reason. So it's
Hmm.
interesting either way. Um,
Yes.
I know a lot of people don't really like going into old cases sometimes, but I like old cases because number one, they're closed. Number two, a lot of times the victims' families have hopefully gotten some kind of closure, and and it does educate the public about
Yeah.
these things. But yes, we'll continue.
Okay, so carrying on, in an act of retaliation, Sylvia was alleged, mind you, alleged to have spread a rumor at the Arsenal Technical High School, the high school they went to, that Stephanie and Paula, Gertie's kids, were prostitutes because she was upset with the household singling her out for similar accusations. In later accounts, this was all fabricated by Paula. Sylvia said nothing. So basically, we're getting the kids now, especially Paula, is egging on their mother, saying, Sylvia said this, Sylvia did this. And the kids are making up these bogus lies of things that Sylvia is doing, but she's not doing, just so Sylvia can get a whooping, or the kids might get a chance themselves to, take out the punishment on Sylvia. So they're starting to work now in a pack type deal, like in a group, and just working together. Whether Gertrude believed everything that the kids were saying that Sylvia was doing or not, it didn't matter. It was an excuse for her to take her anger out on an innocent person.
Well, I mean, she's slowly becoming the scapegoat. Um, it's like basically a scapegoat for everything that's wrong and
Yeah,
with this thing. And if anyone doesn't know, the saying of the scapegoat comes from biblical. I'll read you a small excerpt of that. It basically means in the Bible, the scapegoat is one of the pair of kid goats that is released into the wilderness, taking with it all the sins and impurities, while the other is sacrificed. The concept first appears in the book of Leviticus, in which a goat is designated to be cast into the desert to carry away the sins of the community. So it seems like Sylvia is being the scapegoat, where all
yeah,
their problems, all their frustrations, all their sins, all that is being cast upon this little girl, um, and that's how they justify their abuse.
yeah.
Um, it's definitely dark, but I guess we'll continue.
It gets darker. So again, I am going to throw out trigger warnings yet again. While at school, Stephanie, Gertie's kid, was jokingly propositioned by a boy who told her that Sylvia had started this rumor about her. Upon returning home that day, Stephanie questioned Sylvia about the rumor, and she admitted to starting it. Stephanie punched her in response, but Sylvia apologized to her in tears, and Stephanie then also began to cry. However, when Stephanie's boyfriend, 15-year-old Coy Randolph Hubbard, we're just going to call him Coy Hubbard, heard of the rumor, he brutally attacked Sylvia, slapping her, banging her head against the wall, and flipping her backwards onto the floor. When Gertrude found out, she used a paddle to beat Sylvia. So Gertrude was really worried about the kids' reputations as well as hers. And she justified these beatings and the kids beating her, Sylvia, as well, you did this, I have to protect my kids, and this is what I do to protect my kids. Stupid, stupid way of thinking. Oh, I don't know if you had some wanted to say
No,
something.
no, you continue. You continue. I agree with you.
Okay. On another occasion, Paula beat Sylvia around the excuse me. Paula beat Sylvia on the face with such force that she broke her own wrist, having primarily focused her blows upon Sylvia's teeth and eyes. Later, Paula used the cast on her wrist to further beat Sylvia. Gertrude repeatedly falsely accused Sylvia of being promiscuous and of engaging in prostitution, ranting about the filthiness of prostitution and women in general. Gertrude would later occasionally force Jenny to strike her own sister, beating Jenny if she did not comply. Whew. It's get deeper, y'all. So I do apologize if you cannot take this. I do not blame y'all for watching in later or watching into Monday's show.
Yeah.
But the story, I would like to tell the story.
Yeah.
She needs to be remembered. Coy Hubbard would use Sylvia as a practice dummy for his judo sessions.
I think you missed the part. It says Coy Hubbard and several of his classmates frequently visited.
Oh yeah, there we go. Sorry. Coy Hubbard and several of his classmates frequently visit Gertie's house, since her house was the go-to house where the kids were allowed to drink, smoke, and swear. Coy also physically and mentally hurt Sylvia on every visit, as Gertie would encourage the abuse. So we're seeing something here. There's a group forming.
Yeah, it's a group forming. The authority figure gives the okay, and high party of sex. The authority figure gives the okay, and then the people proceed to escalate. You see cases like this a lot. I mean, like the most famous case is the rape of Nanking. Is a famous kind of situation where a group of people get violent and proceed to commit horrible acts. If you don't know, the rape of Nanking was a horrible event in World War II where an entire Nanking was brutalized. Let's say essays and other murders and beheadings and burnings occurred, and it was completely allowed by the army at that time, Japanese army. It was a very terrible thing. I think the exact numbers are, let me see one.
See, I never knew any of this.
It was approximately Japan butchered an estimated 150,000 males and massacred an additional 50,000 male civilians and sexually assaulted at least 20,000 women and girls of all ages. Now, this is a situation where why I bring this up is because it applies to a situation called groupthink. Now, I'm reading from Web Stanford Education, which is actually a pretty interesting thing I'm going to drop the link just in case anyone wants to read it later, because it is an interesting article to read. And it goes to, during the occupation of the city of Nanking, Japanese forces penetrated inconceivable acts of violence and disrespect towards human life. Our initial response to the occurrence to the question is how people can commit such atrocities on fellow human beings. In attempting to obtain firmer grasp of what occurred in Nanking, we must first look at the events of the sociological perspective. The decision-making process, when undertaken by a large group of people, often produces unexpected and illogical results. The initial orders given to the Japanese soldiers to kill all prisoners were barbaric in themselves, but the soldiers went well beyond these orders. Ultimately, the soldiers in Nanking chose to mutilate, torture, and sexually assault the inhabitants of the city. One syndrome which developed in the aggregate of people that often results in such unexplainable decision is groupthink. Groupthink is defined as, quote, a strong concurrence-seeking tendency that interferes with effective group decision-making. The events of Nanking occurred within the context of the altered mode of thinking that essentially made the Japanese soldiers incapable of making rational decisions. From the onset, the Japanese soldiers living in the occupied city of Nanking formed a deeply cohesive group. The sociological research suggests that members of such unified groups lose the ability to realistically appraise a situation and devise alternative plans of action. In an effort to maintain unity within the group, the Japanese based their decision-making process on reaching complete agreement, which in turn resulted in tragic errors of judgment which could have been otherwise been avoided. In order to understand the concept of groupthink, how to relate to the events which occurred in Nanking, it is important to examine the symptoms that cause the decision-making order. And it goes through the symptoms. And it's very interesting because you'll see examples For instance, one example is the Mind Guards. Also affects groupthink. Mind Guards as members of the group who, in an attempt to preserve the central group idea, omits information which may cause doubts to arise within a group. Mind Guards assumes the responsibility of sheltering the other members of the group from any controversial information which may create disruption in the overall group dynamic. If Mind Guards receive a negative outset information, he does not relate it to the group. A Mind Guard also applies pressure to any dissenting members, ultimately forcing them to speak into silence. To this end, the Mind Guard may employ a variety of different strategies to persuade the dissenter to change his opinion. One of these strategies would be convincing the dissenter that the group may disintegrate if members are not in total agreement. The goal of the Mind Guard is to prevent any questions regarding the group's decision from becoming apparent to the other group members. I'm not going to read the whole article. I dropped in a link and people can read, but I think this is a clear case of groupthink and basically casting this girl as the scapegoat to order and and stuff like that. And that's why I think it's very interesting. That's why I think is the main motive. I think eventually they all saw the authority figure of this woman, basically giving the okay. And then they just kind of proceeded to get worse and worse, just like how the rape of Dan King happened. But yeah, that's something food to thought for people to think about. I guess you can continue the story. I'm sorry to disrupt that.
No, you're good. You're good. It was a good example. People can look into it. Okay, so again, trigger warning again. Coy would use Sylvia as a practice dummy for his judo sessions. He also lacerated her body, burning her skin with lit cigarettes in excess of 100 times and severely injuring her genitalias. Everybody had a thing with kicking Sylvia in the crotch. And it wasn't like a kick. It was like brutal kicks, hitting, and stuff like that. I said hitting, not penetration. At one point, Sylvia was forced to strip down. This is going to get dark. Strip down, naked in the living room of Gertie's home, and masturbate with a glass Pepsi Cola bottle. Gertie told Sylvia this way to prove to her sister Jenny, quote unquote, prove to Jenny what kind of a girl you are, quoted. So this happened, and she wanted Sylvia to do this to show her sister, who her sister didn't see any wrong in Sylvia. They loved each other. But Gertie wanted to try to brainwash Jenny against Sylvia, but it never worked. It never worked. The abuse got so much that Gertie had to pull Sylvia out of school. Gertie told the court she pulled Sylvia from school due to Sylvia stealing gym clothes. It's sick. It's sick. So, yeah, it's sick. For the act of quote-unquote theft, Gertie would whip Sylvia with a 3-inch wide police belt, a memento her ex-husband, John, must have left in the home, because her husband was a deputy. Her ex-husband, John. Gertie then switched her conversations to the quote-unquote evils of premarital sex before repeatedly kicking Sylvia in the genitals as Stephanie railed to Sylvia's defense, shouting out she didn't do anything. So Stephanie was the youngest. Not the youngest, but she was younger than Paula. And she, there was one kid besides Jenny who was trying to defend Sylvia. Gertie then burned Sylvia's fingertips with matches before further whipping her. Gertie would constantly encourage not only her own kids, but the neighborhood kids into abusing Sylvia and humiliating her. At this time as well, Gertie did quote-unquote whip Jenny with a police belt after she reportedly stole a single shoe from the school to wear on her strong foot.
Now, I'd like to point out that I don't think the reason why she was angry was because she stole.
No.
She was angry because it made her look bad.
Yeah.
That she was so poor that she had to steal.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
And that's what I think is another thing to point out. when she's attacking this girl for premeditated, like the suspicion of premeditated sex, I think it's kind of like a projection. I think she's kind of reflecting her anger towards her, maybe.
No,
Because do
yes.
we know how often the ex-husband, the deputy, was aware of the things going on?
No, at this current time when Sylvia moved in, they Gertrude and John, the ex-husband, were divorced for 3 years. So they weren't living together. They were not He wasn't even around. He didn't know any of this happened until the court came up and the charges came up because he was even questioned. There was a lover she had, Dennis Wright, but he disappeared as well. So there was no witnesses beyond the kids, and the neighbors heard some things too. But like Tim said earlier, back then corporal punishment was seen as a good thing of just disciplining your kids. That's how you did it back then. But I blame everybody in this.
Yeah,
I definitely do.
and unfortunately, it's also the system's fault a little bit because you're going to hear later on that neighbors
Yeah.
seeing things.
Yep.
You're going to hear the school kind of did ignored it. You're going to see a couple. You're going to hear. Well, I shouldn't say see hear because you're not going to see it. A couple of scenarios where it's unfortunate. A lot of people did fail this young woman, young girl.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fine if you want to, at Party 6, yeah, it's okay if you want to recommend another video. I mean, listen, I think anyone that wants to watch more videos about this is good. So, if you...
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Hi, Queen. How you doing? Let's continue.
Hey, okay. The money that Sylvia and Jenny's father was giving Gertie was to go to the upkeep of his children, meaning the clothes they desperately needed for school and food. Gertie, though, used the money for herself. So basically the kids Jenny did steal, like it was truth. Jenny did steal the shoe for her good leg, her good foot, but they weren't given any money at all.
Yeah, and it looks like, and you have to realize that, like I said earlier, $20 is the equivalent of $200. So imagine if it was a week, right? Every week?
Every week, $20, yes.
Okay, so think about this. It would be the equivalent of me giving $800 for them to take today to take care of 2 kids in the house.
Mm.
That should be more than enough to basically feed these kids, clothe them, everything.
Yeah.
And to have money left over, to be honest with you, if you have a huge household and you buy bulks and everything like that. But it looks like she was kind of just making them barely survive on nothing so she can just pocket the extra money for other kids.
Well, they lived in desperate poverty. There was a rumor going around. This is a rumor. That's why I didn't include it in the actual information I'm giving out. Again, rumor that Dennis did disappear, but he did come back, but only for money. And Gertie thought to keep him around and also for appearances for her son that she had with him, that she would give him the money. So the money could have been given to Dennis. There's a lot of different stories there.
That would probably work well with the theory that this woman basically wanted to maintain her image and she focused mostly on that.
Yes.
And the reason why I brought up the system is that because, and this is jumping ahead, that a nurse actually came, and because she was lied to that apparently she ran away, that the whole situation is that the nurse just went back, the school nurse. Yeah. There was reports of seeing this girl with marks on her body, bruises on her body, and no one really cared about it. There's other stories, but yeah, it looked like the neighborhood, the school system kind of failed this little girl, and it resulted in her untimely and torturous, and her early torturous death, unfortunately. But yeah, you can continue, Tony.
Okay, sorry. So we got the money. We know, so we have some kind of feeling of where the money's going to. Mind you, at this time as well, too, Gertrude had 9 kids under her roof, including herself. That's 10 people. But still, Tim did the numbers. Back then, it was over $200. For $20.
Yeah, counted for inflation. Yes.
Yeah, inflation. So Yeah, it is. It's very tragic. Hey, Joneson. Sorry if I missed anybody. Hey, y'all. I'm sorry. I'm reading, so
Yeah,
I can't
I'm
say.
keeping. Yeah, and I'm keeping an eye on
Oh,
the chat,
thank
man.
you.
That's
Thank
why
you.
I'm like watching the chat and while you're
Oh,
reading that.
oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Both sisters were fearful of notifying either family members or adults at their school for of the abuse. They both thought that excuse me, that only doing so would worsen their situation. It was said several neighbors did hear Sylvia's cries but ignored them. They later came out publicly saying they heard the cries, but it was too late at that time. In July and August, both Lester and Elizabeth, the mother and father of Jenny and Sylvia, would occasionally return to Indianapolis to visit their daughters whenever their travel schedule afforded them the opportunity. The last occasion Lester and Elizabeth visited their daughters was on October 5th. On this occasion, neither girl exhibited any visible sign of distress about the mistreatment of to their parents. Um, this was likely because both were in a presence of Gertrude and her children. Almost immediately after Lester and Elizabeth had left the the household, on their final visit, Gertrude turned to Sylvia and stated, "quote unquote, what are you going to do now, Sylvia? Now that they're gone?" End quote. Wow. Um,
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, I will say this now, these days, 16-year-olds are built differently. A lot of them can adore stuff, and I can picture a couple 16-year-olds smacking the shit out of
Uh,
Gertrude, but there was a whole clan after them. You know what I mean? Okay.
yeah, it's a condition, I think they call it. But you continue. Well, me, I just need to get the condition, and I'll tell what I mean.
Okay. Okay, continue on. On one occasion in September, the girls encountered their older sister, Diana Shoemaker. That was her married name, Shoemaker, Diana, at a local park. Both Jenny and Sylvia informed Diana about the abuse they were enduring at the hands of their caregiver, adding that Sylvia was being specifically targeted for physical abuse and almost always for things she had neither said or done. Neither sister mentioned the actual address where they resided in. Initially, Diana believed her sisters must have been um, exaggerating their claims regarding the scope of their mistreatment. Basically, the sister thought, "Oh, they got in trouble and Gertie spanked them, and now they're mad and they're
Also,
exaggerating."
didn't they also not tell their home address where they were living at the time as
Yeah,
well?
that's what I just said.
Oh, I'm just
Yeah,
being
they
dumb.
neglected to say that they were trying to get as much as they could because they met her alone at the park.
Yeah,
Every other time that the girls had interaction with their family, Gertrude's kids and Gertrude was around.
yeah,
So
yeah.
they must have been in a panic going, "We have to get everything out right now before, you know."
Also, I would say that the condition I was looking for is Stockholm syndrome. Maybe she was suffering some sort of Stockholm, because a lot of people have pointed that out as a possibility of why she endured such
Oh,
punishment.
yeah. It's very short though. The time span, like I always thought, now I could be wrong. I'm not a fucking scientist here, but I always thought Stockholm syndrome took a while to build up. I'm not saying months. I'm saying like years. But it doesn't, does it? Like, am I
No,
wrong?
no, it doesn't take that long.
It doesn't take that
A
long.
lot of times, for instance, like bank heists, sometimes people build Stockholm syndrome with the people who are literally holding them captive in a bank. Like it does happen. It's interesting because you notice that the woman does abusive,
Hmm.
like is abusive to them, but once in a while probably does something nice, like oh you could do this, you could do that, and it's definitely builds that type of situation, and it's like a slow build. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
when you're a kid, you don't number one, you don't know what to do. You have no money. You have no ability to go anywhere. You're completely relying on this person. She's isolated. She has no family, and the only person that actually is watching her is abusing her. But she doesn't know if it's if she's doing something wrong or something like that. It's definitely a sad situation. But yeah, it probably, you're thinking and then when she actually does turn to her sister for help,
Mm,
she gets rejected,
yeah.
and now she has to completely rely on this woman for everything. And and for those who don't know Stockholm syndrome, I'm reading the Google thing. It says feeling of trust affection felt in many cases of a kidnap or hostage taking by a victim towards a captor. Now I don't know what the feelings of this girl was towards Gertie, but I don't think we'll ever know. But there have been people that have pointed out the possibility of Stockholm syndrome. Is it possible? Yes. Do I know? No, but there is a possibility. But yeah.
No, there is definitely a possibility.
Uh, all right, you can go. Keep on reading.
Okay. Um. Okay, I'm just finding my I think hold on a second. I screwed up my notes. Several weeks prior to this, Sylvia and Jenny had encountered Diana in the same park while in the company of 11-year-old Marie uh, Brents Brenswiski. I cannot pronounce their
Broninsky.
Brinsky. And Sylvia had been given a sandwich to eat when she mentioned to her sister that she was hungry. Sylvia remained silent about the matter, although Marie revealed this fact to her family in late September. In response, Gertrude accused Sylvia of engaging in gluttony before she and Paula choked her and bludgeoned her. The pair then subjected Sylvia to to a scalding bath in order to cleanse, quote unquote, cleanse her sins, which Gertrude, grabbing Sylvia's hair and repeatedly banging her head against the bath to revive her whenever she fainted.
And
Getting
also,
dark.
Sherry says there is a mindset to avoid the abuse. You go along and agree.
Yeah,
They start
there is.
thinking maybe I deserve this. Yes, that is very true. And it's a very slow boil. Hi, Ellie, by the way, and hi, Sleuth Mom,
Hello.
and George Peach, by the way. You can continue, man.
Shortly after this incident, the father of the neighborhood boy named Michael John Moore phoned the Arsenal Technical High School, the high school that they all went to anonymously report that a girl with open sores across her entire body was living in the Brens and Gertrude's home. I'm just going to say Gertrude's home.
Yeah, you're better. That's
Gertrude's
why I said I
household.
told you to say the first name. Well, that's your better
Yeah.
because it's a very tough name to.
It is a very tough name, and I don't care about butchering it either because they're all cunts. Uh,
Yeah,
as
agreed.
oh sorry, as Sylvia had not attended school for several days, a school nurse visited East New York Street to investigate these claims. Gertrude claimed to the nurse that Sylvia had run away from her home on the previous week and that she was unaware of her actual whereabouts, adding that Sylvia was quote unquote out of control and that her open sores were a result of Sylvia's refusal to maintain decent personal hygiene.
Now you notice that she's still placing blame. This goes to
Yeah,
definitely the scapegoat thing.
yeah,
Nothing this woman does is wrong. Everything is her. She's a bad kid. She's promiscuous. She doesn't take care of herself. She's not a good hygiene. I try, and people bought it, line, hook, and sink. Bought it,
sicker. Yeah,
sinker. Yeah. You continue, but yeah, that was what I was pointing out with the nurse basically going there. It's like a kid missing from school, has sores, or was reporting sores. Today, you would get a lot more of a response, but back then, unfortunately, that was not the case.
yeah.
But you can continue.
Okay. Gertrude further claimed that Sylvia was a bad influence on both her own children and her sister Jenny. The school made no further investigations concerning Sylvia's welfare. So the school basically were like, okay, Gertrude, whatever you say. The immediate neighbors of Gertrude's family were a middle aged couple named Raymond and Phyllis Vermillion. Wow, people had big names. Both initially viewed Gertrude as an ideal caregiver for the sisters. and both had visited Gertrude's residence on 2 occasions while the girls had been under Gertie's care. On both occasions, however, the neighbors witnessed Paula physically abusing Sylvia, who on both occasions had black eyes, and Paula openly boasted about her mistreatment of the child to them. Upon their second visit at Gertie's household, both observed Sylvia to appear extremely meek and somewhat zombified, quote unquote zombified, in nature. Nevertheless, the neighbors never reported Sylvia's evident mistreatment to the authorities. I'm a big person when it says, when you see something, you say something.
Yeah, but back then I think like
I know back then, I know we're learning from past mistakes. I get it. But when Paul is openly boasting about her beating Sylvia for the hell of beating Sylvia, you're gonna think, oh, there's a problem, no?
yeah, you would think that would be the case, but unfortunately, um, I don't know. I mean, you see it like you don't really see it too much with like small towns in New York. I mean, I've heard situations where people have literally been beat the shit out of and everyone watched. You know,
Oh, that case in New York City of the girl who got murdered at the stairs of her apartment, and there was like what, 51 witnesses or something like that.
I'm not familiar, but that would make sense for New
They
York,
did
unfortunately.
nothing. They did
Yeah.
nothing. They ignored it, and that was
Uh,
during this time too.
yeah, and unfortunately, you do see that situation where people just be like, "Well, I don't know nothing about it. I don't want to get involved," and they kind of walk away. It's really
Back then, it was normal. Today, I would beat the fucking shit out of you. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
For the time, I'm surprised that one parent even called the school.
Well, no parents called the school whatsoever. It was the child of one of the parents, Michael, anonymously called the school to report it.
Wasn't he more like complaining about Sylvia? I thought I read somewhere like he was kind of like
I I don't know. I think he was in. Hold on. I would have to go through my notes. I think he was. Uh,
sorry about that, Tony.
no. You're good. I'm trying to remember. There's a lot of kids who were prosecuted in this case, so it's really hard for me to keep up with the names. But I do know that one of the kids named Michael, um, did anonymously call the school to help Sylvia. That's all I know. But there could have been another Michael that
Yeah,
you get what, or it could be the
yeah.
same one.
I could be wrong, but anyway, you can continue. You continue, man. I'll
Okay.
look it up while you're doing
Yeah,
that.
please do. Um, on or about October 1st, Diana Shoemaker, the girl's older sisters, discovered that her sisters were at the Gertrude's residence. She visited the property in an attempt to initiate regular contact. Gertrude, however, refused to allow Diana entry to the property, stating that she had, quote unquote, received permission from their parents not to allow either of the girls to see Diana. She then ordered Diana to leave the property. Approximately 2 weeks later, Diana encountered Jenny by chance close to the home and inquired as to Sylvia's welfare. She was informed, quote unquote, Jenny saying, I can't tell you, I'll get into trouble. I don't know about y'all, but if I was in this situation, I don't care what the time period is. You're telling me I can't see my fucking sisters? We're going to have words. That's
Like,
just me. That's just me, though. Back then, I bet, back then I probably would, I would probably be burnt alive. But, anyways, I'm just saying, she was
yeah,
trying.
you can
National
continue.
Child Abuse Hotline. Thank you, Grandma. I'm going to put this up here. Thank you so much, Grandma, for sharing that.
Yeah,
But Jenny did say to her sister, I can't tell you or I'll get into trouble. That would have been, to me, a big red flag. But I'm sure the family has enough regrets on their shoulders for trusting Gertrude with their child. Both of them children. because Jenny walked away with a lot of scars as well from this. I mean, she witnessed her sister dying
Yeah.
and the torture. So both of them, you know. Now we're going to get to the escalation of the abuse. Now there's a lot of quotations and there's a lot of words here, so please bear with me when I read this. I did copy some quotes as well, and this is all from Wikipedia under the murder of Sylvia Likens. So this is all quoted. Conversation. Okay, I'll read that quote right there. I'll read that when we get to the part. I don't know why I put it up there. Due to the increase of the frequency and brutality of the torture and mistreatment Sylvia was subjected to, she gradually became incontinent. She wasn't able to hold her bowels or her bladder anymore. That's how bad the abuse got. She was denied any access to the bathroom, being forced to wet herself, and as a form of punishment for her wetting the bed and making accidents, on October 6th, Gertrude threw Sylvia into the basement and tied her up. Here, Sylvia was often kept naked, rarely fed, and was frequently deprived of water. Occasionally, she was tied to the railing of the basement stairs with her feet barely touching the ground. It's going to get dark, so I do want to, again, trigger warning, but her story needs to be told. In the weeks prior to locking Sylvia in the family basement, Gertrude had increasingly abused and tormented Sylvia. She would occasionally falsely claim to the children in her household that either she herself or one of them had been receiving direct insults from Sylvia in the hopes this would provoke them into believing or attacking her. So basically, Gertrude was telling her kids and the neighborhood kids that hung out at her house, oh, Sylvia did this, Sylvia said this about you, you know.
Yes.
I know bushes, I know it is dark, the whole thing is dark.
Yeah, when we say it gets darker, it gets darker. I mean, we did a live on Jinko, and that was, so we know we're
That
dark.
was, yeah, and we really did. I'm trying to skip some, like, if you want to know all the torture stuff, by all means go to the
I think it's best, to be
wiki.
honest with you, is just to give like a slight summary and say, listen, you can go to Wikipedia and read it, because I think, for one, I think it's not necessary to go into
Yeah,
the exact details of every single horrible thing that
no,
happened to this poor little girl. I think it's just generally it was a lot of really bad things, and maybe and just get to the key things that resulted in her death would probably be
yeah,
best.
the most of the things that we're talking about now, the abuse that we're talking about now, is what happened, which was brought up in the case. All the little things and stuff, which were equally as worse, you can find out on Wikipedia, Murderpedia, or you can watch another person's video. I just don't want to
Yeah,
entertain that.
and also it's just kind of like, there's no point to get into those details.
Yeah,
We all know this girl was horribly abused
yeah,
by a group of people who were supposed to be, that she was supposed to be, trust and care for her, and resulted in her untimely, torturous death. But
yeah.
anyway, you can continue.
Okay. On the occasion, Gertrude held a knife aloft and challenged Sylvia to fight, quote unquote, fight me back, which to Sylvia replied she did not know how to fight. In response, Gertrude inflicted a light score wound on Sylvia's leg. Physical and mental torment such as this would occasionally pause when the Gertrude's kids watched their favorite television shows. So basically, they'll stop the torture when their show is on. Sarcasm there, y'all. Sarcasm. Neighborhood children were also occasionally charged 5 cents a piece to see the quote unquote display of Sylvia's body and to humiliate, beat, scale, burn, and ultimately mutilate her. So basically, neighborhood kids were paying to see Sylvia tied up, beaten. Okay. Throughout Sylvia's captivity in the basement, Gertrude frequently, with the assistance of her children and neighborhood children, restrained and gagged Sylvia before placing her in a bathtub filled with scalding water and proceeding to rub salt into her wounds. On one occasion, Gertrude and her 12-year-old son, John Jr., that's John Wright's kid, John Jr., no, sorry, John Berkowitz, Burke, the first husband, the deputy. Um, on one occasion, Gertrude and her 12-year-old son, John Jr., rubbed urine and feces from Gertrude's 1-year-old son's diaper into Sylvia's mouth before giving her a cup half filled with water, stating that the water was all she would receive for the remainder of the day. Yes. And this is the stuff that I'm bringing up. This isn't the stuff. There's a lot more stuff that wasn't brought up in our show tonight. On October 22nd, John Jr. tormented Sylvia by offering to allow her to eat a bowl of soup with her fingers and quickly taking away the bowl. When Sylvia, by this stage suffering from extreme malnourishment, attempts to eat the food. Gertrude eventually allowed Sylvia to sleep upstairs on the condition that she learned not to wet herself. That night, Sylvia whispered to Jenny to secretly give her a glass of water before falling asleep. These poor girls. The following morning, Gertrude discovered Sylvia had urinated on herself. As a punishment, Sylvia was forced to insert an empty glass cola bottle into her self and in the presence of her children before Gertrude ordered her into the basement. So this is the second time with the Pepsi Cola bottle.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something before I start?
No.
Okay.
You continue.
Okay, shortly thereafter, Gertrude shouted for Sylvia to return to the kitchen and then ordered her to strip naked before proclaiming her, quote unquote, "You have branded my daughters, and now I'm going to brand you."
Now, what did she mean by "you have branded my daughters and now I'm going to brand
Remember
you"?
earlier,
she remembered all that long ago?
Well, this abuse happened in a 3 to 4 month span.
So do you think, okay, now I'm sorry. So maybe she was mad about the reputation that she lost because of her daughters being accused of being prostitutes. And it's very interesting that could have actually been kind of true, since one of the daughters got pregnant from a married man.
Yeah.
So this is all really about her. It's all about what people think. And she is kind of attacking this little girl. I see. All right, I got you. Mean? Now you can continue.
Okay. Again, this is your final warning, everybody. If you do not want to hear the rest, please leave. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be back on Monday for a better show for y'all, a lighter show. But if you can't handle what I'm about to say, please, by all means. But thank you for joining. This is your final warning. Gertrude then began carving the words into Sylvia, quote unquote, "I am a prostitute and proud of it." I have the picture of this, but I'm having a second thought on sharing it because I don't want to share it. The picture is on Google.
Yes.
If you want to look at it, go look at it, but I will not put this on the show.
I would say, I will describe the imagery. It's kind of like The Exorcist. When the girl is in The Exorcist has been, towards the end, let's just say. It is pretty bad. They write on her stomach. The exact quote they wrote on her stomach using a heated needle.
Yeah, "I am a prostitute and proud of it."
And also, they tried to make an S, but and all three participated, and it became an S instead of, it became a 3 instead of an S. I think you'll read that part. But imagine a person who is very bruised all over, backwards nails, broken teeth, like everything broken about her and branded, and you get the image. You don't need to see it. But we'll continue. We'll just, I guess you can read it and don't show the image of it.
No, I don't want to show it. If you guys want it, that's completely up to you. That's your own prerogative. No judgment, because obviously I have seen it, but I don't want to put it on here.
But yes, you can continue.
Yeah. When Gertrude was unable to finish the branding, she instructed one of the neighborhood children present, 14-year-old Richard Dean Hobbs, to finish etching the words into Sylvia's flesh. As she took Jenny to a nearby grocery store, I guess that was one act of kindness, is that Gertrude took Jenny to the grocery store so she wasn't witnessing her sister's continued torment of being branded. And what Hobbes would later insist were quote unquote short and light etchings. He continued to brand the text into Sylvia's abdomen as she clenched her teeth and moaned. Both Hobbes and 10-year-old, mind you the ages when I say this, these are kids. 10-year-old Shirley, one of Gertrude's daughters, Shirley, then led Sylvia into the basement where each proceeded to use an anchor bolt in an attempt to burn the letter S beneath Sylvia's left breast. Although they applied one section of the loop backwards, and this deep burn scarred would resemble the number 3. Yeah. Gertrude later taunted Sylvia by claiming she would never be able to marry due to the words carved onto her stomach, stating, quote unquote, these are quotes, y'all, "Sylvia, what are you going to do now? You can't get married now. What are you going to do?" Weeping, Sylvia replied, quote unquote, "I guess there's nothing I can do." End quote. Later that day, Sylvia was forced to display the carvings to the neighborhood children, with Gertrude claiming she had received the inscription in a sex party. So the stories are now progressing to bigger and bigger things. Did her sister tell the story of poor Sylvia? We're going to get to that, but yes, her sister, in my eyes, even though it was too late, was the hero. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and you
I
gotta
could have gone
realize,
to Jenny after that. Do you
and
get
you
what
gotta
I'm saying?
realize that the reason why Sylvia was taking such abuse also was that she was trying to be like the lightning rod, so
Hmm.
Jenny would not be abused because Jenny had polio, and
Yeah,
she was trying to make sure her Jenny would not be abused. So a lot of times she just took it. Um,
exactly.
so that was the situation also. But
Exactly.
I guess you can continue.
Okay, so that night, Sylvia confided in her sister Jenny. This is a quote unquote came from Jenny on what Sylvia's last words were. Jenny, I know you don't want me to die, but I'm going to die. I can tell it. The following day, Gertrude woke Sylvia, then forced her to write a letter as she dictated the contents, which were intended to mislead her parents into believing their daughter had run away from Gertrude's residence. Then the contents of this letter was intended to frame a group of anonymous local boys for extensively abusing and mutilating Sylvia after she had initially agreed to engage in sexual relations with them before they inflicted the extreme abuse and torture upon her body. After Sylvia had written this letter, Gertrude finished formulating her plan to have John Jr. and Jenny blindfold Sylvia, then take her to a nearby wooded area known as Jimmy's Forest, and leave her there to die. After she had finished writing the letter, Sylvia was then again tied to the stairs of the railing and offered crackers to eat. Although she refused them, saying, "Give it to the," Sylvia said, "Give it to the dog. I don't want it," quote unquote. In response, Gertrude forced the crackers into Sylvia's mouth before she had John beat her, particularly around the stomach. Mind you, Sylvia was very dehydrated. She was refused water, and when she was given water, it was barely a half a glass of water. So she was dehydrated. You would think giving a person saltine crackers to eat would be the worst thing in the world. They're not going to be able to eat it at all. I mean, try eating 5 saltine crackers without a drink by. It's going to be really hard. On October 25th or the 26th, this is where it's going to get a little bit confusing. It was either on the 25th or on the 26th, so you didn't hear that line.
Sylvia was 16.
Yes, she was 16 years old. She was 16.
Wasn't Jen 15? I'm trying to remember.
I thought she was 12, but I could be wrong. I
Okay,
could be definitely wrong.
Let me just check on my.
Okay, while he checks that, I'm going to read this. On October 25th, Sylvia attempted to escape the basement after overhearing a conversation between Gertrude and John Jr., pertaining to the family's plan to abandon her and die. She attempted to flee to the front door. However, due to her extensive injuries and general weakness, Gertrude caught her before she could escape the property. Sylvia was then given crackers to eat, but was unable to consume the food due to her extreme state of dehydration. Gertrude forced the crackers into her mouth before repeatedly striking her face with a curtain rod until sections of the instrument were bent into right angles. Coy Hubbard, one of the neighborhood boys, then took the curtain rod from Gertrude and struck Sylvia one further time, rendering her unconscious. Gertrude then dragged Sylvia into the basement again. Did you find the age? What?
No, I didn't. You want me to continue? Are you right?
No, I'm good to go. I'm good to go. I know this is dark, everybody, but if it gets too dark, again, thank you for joining us. Maybe this tonight's not the show. We'll have a better show.
Yeah, more. But we like to.
More.
We
More
like to
uplifting.
Yeah.
That evening, Likens desperately attempted to alert the neighbors by screaming for help and hitting the walls of the basement with a spade. One immediate neighbor of Gertrude's house would later inform police she had heard the desperate commotion and that she had identified the source as it coming from the basement of the home, but that as the noise had suddenly ceased at approximately 3 a.m., she decided not to inform the police about the disturbance. See, if this neighbor heard this and thought, I need to call the police, and even if it stopped, you still call the police. Jen was 15. Okay.
Yes. But you continue.
Okay, we're going to get into the death of her now. By the morning of October 26, Sylvia was unable to either speak intelligibly or correctly coordinate the movements of her limbs. Gertrude moved Sylvia into the kitchen, having propped her back against a wall, attempted to feed her a donut and a glass of milk. She threw Sylvia to the floor in frustration when Sylvia was unable to correctly move the glass of milk to her lips. She was then returned to the basement. Shortly thereafter, Sylvia became delirious, repeatedly moaning and mumbling when Paula asked her to recite the English alphabet. Sylvia was unable to recite anything beyond the first 4 letters to raise herself off the ground. In response, Paula verbally threatened her to either stand up or she would inflict a long jump upon her, which I don't know what that means. Maybe Tim, inflict a long jump upon her.
Inflict a long jump upon her? Where did you read that from?
Wikipedia. Maybe it's a drop kick. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
Gertrude then ordered Sylvia, who had defecated, to clean herself. So during all the beatings of that day, she accidentally defecated on herself. That afternoon, several of Sylvia's other tormentors gathered in the basement. Sylvia jerkedly moved her arms in an apparent attempt to point at the faces of the tormentors she could recognize, making statements such as, quote unquote, "You are Ricky. You are Gertie." Before Gertrude, these are quotes, by the way, before Gertrude shouted, "Shut up, you know who I am," quote unquote. Minutes later, Sylvia unsuccessfully attempted to bite into a rotten pear she had been given to eat, stating she could not feel she could feel the looseness in her teeth. Upon hearing this, Jenny replied, quote unquote, "Don't you remember, Sylvia? Your front tooth was knocked out when you were 7." Jenny then left Sylvia in the basement to perform gardening chores for the neighbors in hopes of earning spending money. An attempt to wash Sylvia, a laughing John Jr. sprayed her with a garden hose brought into the house that afternoon by Randy Lepper, at another neighborhood kid. Randy's another neighborhood kid. At Gertrude's request. Sylvia again desperately attempted to exit the basement but collapsed before she could reach the stairs. In response to this effort, Gertrude stomped upon Likens' head before standing and staring at her for several moments. Shortly after 5:30 p.m., Richard Hobbs returned to Gertrude's residence and immediately proceeded to the basement. He slipped on the wet basement stairs and fell heavily on the floor of the basement to confront with the sight of Stephanie crying and cuddling Sylvia emaciated and lacerated body after she had been ordered by her mother to clean Sylvia. So there was one child feeling some guilt, Stephanie. But Stephanie was the one to defend Likens earlier, like we said. From her own mother, mind you. I think Stephanie was the only one that, besides, Jenny was too afraid, but I think
Yeah.
I think Stephanie was the one. That was her own mother she was standing up to, but it didn't work, sadly.
Yeah.
Stephanie and Richard then decided to give Sylvia a warm, soapy bath and dress her in new clothes. Wow, that's kind. Sarcasm. Then they laid her upon a mattress in one of the bedrooms. As Sylvia muttered her final wish to her, quote unquote, "Daddy was here." This is what Sylvia said.
Mm-hmm.
And that Stephanie would take her home. Stephanie then turned to her younger sister, Shirley, exclaiming, quote unquote, "Oh, she'll be all right." Children's minds. I don't think children understand.
Well, I
That
mean,
very well.
obvious. I agree with you with that one.
Yeah. When Stephanie realized that Sylvia was not breathing, she attempted to apply mouth to mouth resuscitation as Gertrude repeatedly shouted to the children in the house that Sylvia was faking her death. Sylvia was 16 years old when she finally succumbed to her injuries.
Mm.
Now, this is getting to the legal part of it. Do you want me to do it or you to do it? Because you might. It's up to you.
I'll read the rest.
Okay.
Arrest. Okay, this is from Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Giltrid initially beat Likens' corpse with a book shouting, "Faker, faker," end quote, in order to rouse her. However, she soon panicked and instructed Richard Hobbs to call. Do you have a picture of Richard Hobbs, or of the suspects? Not suspects. I mean, of the convicted.
I think I do. One moment. So I'll get it up.
Yeah. Not the suspects, but the actual killers. My apologies. Richard Hobbs to call the police from the nearby payphone. When the police arrived at her address at approximately 6:30 p.m., Giltrid led the officers to Likens' emaciated, extensively bludgeoned, and mutilated body lying upon soiled mattress in a bedroom before handing them the letter she had forced Likens to write previously by her dictation. She also claimed she had been, quote, doctoring, end quote, the child for an hour or more prior to her death, having applied rubbing alcohol to Likens' wounds in a futile attempt at first aid before she had died. She added that Liken had earlier run away from her home with several teenage boys before returning to her house earlier that afternoon, bare-breasted and clutching the note. Clutching a Bible, Paula. That's
Oh, now they have a fucking Bible.
yeah. Having stated to all present in the household that Likens' death was, quote, meant to happen, end quote, then glanced in Jenny's direction and calmly stated, quote, if you want to live with us, Jenny, we'll treat you like our own sister, end
How?
quote.
Oh god. Okay, so here's real quick before you continue on. Here's the picture in the top left corner here. This is Gertrude right here, as you can see. And this smug son of a bitch right here is Paula right next to her. And you notice how she smirks in her mugshot? Right here is the Hobbs boy with the glasses, and next to Gertrude. And I don't know if this is Stephanie at the bottom in the small picture or not, but that's them.
Okay. As previously instructed by Gertrude, Jenny Likens recited the rehearsed version of the events leading to Likens' death to the police, before whispering to the officers, quote, you get me out of here and I'll tell you everything, end quote. The formal statement provided by Jenny Likens prompted officers to arrest Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, so you might be right with Stephanie, and John Benowisky Jr., on suspicion of Likens' murder within hours of the discovery of her body. The same day, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs were also arrested and charged with the same offenses. The three eldest Benitsky children, plus Coy Hubbard, were placed in custody of a nearby juvenile detention center. The younger Benitsky children and Richard Hobbs were detained at the Indianapolis Children's Guardian's Home. All were held without bail pending trial. Initially, Gertrude denied any involvement in Likens' death, although by October 27th, she had confessed to having known, quote, the kids, end quote, particularly her daughter Paula and Coy Hubbard, had physically and emotionally abused Likens, stating, quote, Paula did most of the damage, end quote, and quote, Coy Hubbard did a lot of the beating, end quote. Gertrude further admitted to having forced the girl to sleep in the basement on approximately 3 occasions when she had wet the bed. She became evasive when one officer stated that likely reason Likens had become incontinent were her mental distress and injury to her kidneys. Lacking any remorse, Paula signed a statement admitting to having repeatedly beaten Likens about the backside with her mother's police belt, once breaking her wrist on Likens' jaw and inflicting other acts of brutality, including pushing her down the stairs into the basement. Quote, 2 or 3 times, end quote, and inflicting a black eye. John Jr. admitted to having, quote, spanked, end quote, Sylvia on one occasion, adding that, quote, most of the time I used my fist, end quote, to abuse her. He admitted to 5 other neighborhood children who had participated in Likens' abuse: Michael Monroe, Randy Lepper, Darlene McGuire, Judy Duke, and Ann Cisco had also been arrested by October 29th. All were charged with causing injury to a person, and each was subsequently released into the custody of their parents under subpoena to appear as a witness at the upcoming trial. Now, the autopsy results of Sylvia, the autopsy of Likens' body revealed she had suffered in excess of 150 separate wounds across her entire body, in addition to being extremely emaciated. And at the time of her death, the wounds themselves varied in location and nature, severity, and stage of healing. Her injuries included burns, severe bruising, extensive muscle and nerve damage. Her vaginal cavity was almost swollen shut. Moreover, all Likens' fingernails were broken backwards, and most of the external layers of the skin upon the child's face, breast, neck, and right knee had peeled or receded. In her death throes, Liken had evidently been through her lips, partially severing sections of them from her face. The official cause of Likens' death was listed by coroner Dr. Arthur Kimmel as subdural hematoma due to her receiving a severe blow to her right temple. Both of the shock she had primarily suffered due to the severe and prolonged damage inflicted on her skin and subcutaneous tissue, plus the severe malnutrition, were listed as contributory factors to her death. Rigor mortis had fully developed at the time of the discovery of her body, indicating Lichen may have been deceased for up to 8 hours before she was found. Although Dr. Kibble did note Lichen had been recently bathed, possibly after death, and that this act could have hastened the loss of the body temperature and thus sped the onset of rigor mortis. The funeral service of Sylvia Liken was conducted at Russell and Hitch Funeral Home in Lebanon on the afternoon of October 29th. The service was officiated by Reverend Lewis Gibson with more than 100 mourners in attendance. Likens' gray casket remained open throughout the ceremony with a portrait of her taken prior to 1965 adjoining her coffin. In the eulogy, the Reverend Gibson stated, quote, "We all have our time of passing, but we won't suffer as our little sister suffered during the last days of her life," end quote. Reverend Gibson then strode towards Likens' casket before adding, quote, "She has gone to eternity," end quote. Following the service, Likens' casket was placed by pallbearers in the hearse and driven to Oak Hill Cemetery to be interred. This hearse was one of the 14 vehicles positioned to drive to the cemetery for Likens' burial. Her headstone is inscribed with the words, quote, "Our darling daughter," end quote. Indictment. Do you want to play the video for the indictment?
Yes. Just double checking with you.
Because the video, what's interesting about the video, it actually has them the recorded conversation, and it would be very interesting. Police belt. Yes.
Gertrude and the crime case of Sylvia. Is that the one that you wanted me to play?
Yes. Maybe if you want, let me just let me just look at it for 1 second, just to tell you the timestamp to play it from. One second, because we don't want to jump.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can play it. That's good. Guilt trip and the true crime, and it talks about the case, and that'll be very interesting because it shows pictures, and also I think this guy actually sat through the situation.
Yeah. So this is a short video. It's only 8 minutes long, and it's provided by Dark Weird Shit / Crime Stories. So it's one of those dark channels.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So pressing play now.
So this is a newspaper reporter. Okay.
The courtroom was packed. They didn't have enough room for the defendants on the police docket in the courtroom because there were so many spectators there.
Can you make it a widescreen?
That is widescreen.
No, that's not widescreen because I could see, like, you got to make it bigger. You see yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
All over the city county building that worked there came to see the initial arraignment in the municipal court, and it was just it wasn't mayhem, it was just crowded. Well, the defendants, Gertrude Banashevsky is the one everybody focuses on. She was haggard. You could see that she had once maybe been a pretty woman, but she wasn't by then, and she just looked exhausted. And of course, her defense was that she was exhausted while all this was happening, and she couldn't have supervised it. Her daughter Paula was
pausing real quick. Paula looks like she can't take one picture without smugging, like she got away with it.
Yeah,
do you get what I'm saying?
That's the look of stupidity.
Yeah.
Just sort of a slob and just sat there, and we never heard much from her. She didn't testify. Johnny Banashevsky, he was sort of cute, a little pudgy, 12-year-old kid charged with murder. The others charged were Richard Hobbs and Coy Hubbard. Now, Ricky Hobbs, he's 15 at the time of the trial, 14 at the time of the murder. He looked like an ordinary teenage kid, and in most ways seemed to be. The fact was, he carved a tattoo on this teenage girl's belly in the process of her death. The other defendant was Coy Hubbard. He was taller and bigger and looked mean. And he was later convicted of armed robbery after he served his sentence for manslaughter in the case of Sylvia Likens. Who were the monsters in this case? Well, obviously, the jury didn't miss with Gertrude Banaszewski. And I think they didn't miss with Paula Banaszewski. She was mean as a snake. She had no sympathy for anyone. Now, there was an incident where Paula took Sylvia to the door and advised her to get the hell out, because if she didn't, she was in bigger trouble than she already was. But that was one glimmer of sympathy from Paula. She didn't try to help Sylvia escape. She didn't find her a place to go. And she broke her arm, slugging Sylvia in the jaw, and went to church and bragged about it.
Radio Indiana, WIBC, Indianapolis.
Parole in a 20-year-old murder case. And this is WIBC News. May 1965, when 16-year-old Sylvia Likens was tortured to death by members of the Banaszewski family, with whom the child was staying while her parents worked with a traveling carnival. When the case broke, Paul Page was our anchorman, and the late Bob Huber, our street reporter. The following is an excerpt from a 1965 newscast in which Bob Huber spoke with Richard Hobb, who explained what he did to the girl.
All I did was right up that thing on her stomach, and I hit her about 10 or 15 times.
How come?
Well, mostly because Gertie told me to.
Huber then spoke to one of the Banaszewski children, who told him how the victim was treated.
She refused food. We tried to get her soup every once in a while and stuff like that, and she wouldn't take it.
Well, how about these scratch marks on her stomach? Who put them on her?
I did.
Why?
Well, Gertie just thought of it. She said, since you branded us, we're going to brand you. So she itched in with a pin, and I went over it. She showed me how to do it, and I went over it. I did it.
Did you ever use any hot irons on her?
No. Yeah, that 3 on her stomach, I did half of that. And Shirley Ann did the other half.
Where'd the S come from?
What do you mean?
There's a big S branded on her stomach, right below one of her breasts.
That's what I'm talking about.
Well, that's what you're talking about. Now, how about the inscription on there, I'm a prostitute and proud of it? Who put that on?
I did.
Did you scratch it on there, paint it on there? How'd you do it?
Well, like I said before, Gertie wrote it down there with a pen, and I did the rest. She showed me how to do it, and
Had Gertie abused this girl?
yeah.
Gertrude Banaszewski, however, had a different story.
I did never beat that girl. Never. She was beat up on by other girls. In fact, my own daughter socked her in the jaw and broke her wrist. And so, I mean, there you go. And girls around the neighborhood beat her up, bloodied her nose. One girl broke her nose, in fact, I think.
Were you ever in contact with the police on any of these occasions?
Well, in the last 2 weeks, in fact, I think if you talk to my daughters, I asked them that the children's father and I are divorced. And he's a policeman in Beach Grove, or was. And I've asked the girls repeatedly, call their dad and ask them what to do. And in fact, I asked Jenny, I said, Jenny, and I told Sylvia, I said, Sylvia, I'm going to have to call the police or somebody because I can't have any responsibility.
But the police were called only one time. And according to Hobb,
Well, I come in and she come up from the basement, and we noticed she was cold and everything, so we carried her upstairs, give her a warm bath and artificial respiration. When she stopped breathing, we gave her a warm bath, and then she stopped breathing. And so I gave her artificial respiration for about 10 minutes. And then I went and called the police.
by the time police found the girl, she had been dead some 8 to 12 hours.
We have another story of crime and punishment tonight from Indiana. This time the criminal is getting out of jail, but as Edie Magnus reports, not without a great deal of
Can
controversy.
you stop it for a moment?
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess I should read the sentences that they got. Obviously, they got convicted. You can read the full story about that. We're kind of running a little time, and I think there's But basically, what happened is Giltrid was sentenced to life in prison, but credulously against the outcry of the public, she was paroled in 1985, just 20 years after the death of Sylvia Likens, and died 5 years later of lung cancer in 1990. Poehler, 17, was convicted of second-degree murder before having her conviction overturned in 1971 due to technicality. She pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter and got 2 to 21 years. Once again, the law seems to have been mocking Sylvia by paroling Poehler in 1972, despite and an attempted prison break. Richard Hobbs, 15, was convicted of manslaughter and served 2 years. He died of cancer at the age of 21. John Benowinski, 13, was convicted of manslaughter and served 2 years. He is the only Benowinski to show any remorse for his crimes. Stephanie Benowinski, 15, had all charges against her dropped. Marie Benowinski, 11, was never charged and was the only member of the Benowinski family to cry during the trial. Shirley Benowinski, 10, despite her active participation, was never charged. I guess you can continue playing it.
Okay. Pressing play.
Under heavy security, convicted murderess
That's
Gertrude
Gertrude
Banashevsky
now.
appeared before the
Well,
Indiana
good.
Parole Board and asked to be released from prison after 20 years behind bars.
I'm just asking for mercy, nothing else.
Banashevsky was convicted of the 1965 brutal torture and slaying of a neighbor's child, 16-year-old Sylvia Likens. The girl was bludgeoned, scalded, tattooed, and starved by Banashevsky and her children while she lived in their home. Banashevsky was sent to prison for life. Banashevsky's request for an early parole from prison outraged victims' rights groups throughout the community, who said she should never have a second chance. But in September, the parole board voted to give her that chance. Then protesters collected 40,000 signatures objecting to her release and staged a memorial funeral procession to Sylvia Likens' grave. The wave of protest persuaded a judge to vacate the earlier parole decision and order today's extraordinary hearing before the public.
If you turn Gertrude Banashevsky loose, you might as well put me in prison, because I would be in prison in my own home, afraid to go anywhere by myself again.
Banashevsky told the parole board she's a born-again Christian. She burst into tears when asked to talk about her crime.
I can't do it, and I'm sorry. That's all I can say. And I ask him to forgive me. That's all I can tell you.
Once again, the board voted 3-2 to let Banashevsky go.
Bottom line, you cannot bring someone who is dead and gone back to life. And I wouldn't be a member of this board if I didn't believe people could change.
Banashevsky will be released soon, as she already has a place to stay, a new job, and a new identity, so she can try to lead a normal life. Edie Magnus, ABC News.
And good news, she died 5 years later.
Yeah, she died.
There is an interesting thing where I think here you could play this one, and it's going to be.
Do you want to play the Paula one?
No, we're going to play the KCC, convicted killer found to be teacher.
Yeah, the Paula one. That was Paula.
Okay, you can play that.
Okay, convicted. Okay, 1 second, y'all. I'm setting
And we're almost done. I know the Murdoch trial verdict is coming in. I realize people are interested, but we're almost done. And thank you for those staying. And I understand.
It was a shock.
Skedaddle.
Okay, so this is going to be the last video.
All right.
And pressing play.
It was a shock for a small Iowa town.
A convicted killer hiding her identity was teaching in their high school. Tonight, Todd Mega reports she is out of a job.
Kevin and Stacy, it happened in the town of Conrad, just north of Marshalltown in Grundy County. And tonight, a 47-year-old crime is the talk of the town.
I found it kind of scary.
Students at BCLUW High School in Conrad are just discovering a bizarre secret.
It was just weird.
One of their teacher aides, Paula Pace, is a convicted killer. In 1965, she was Paula Banashevsky in Indianapolis. She was a member of a family that tortured and killed a neighbor girl, 16-year-old Sylvia Likens, in the Banashevsky home. Paula's mother, Gertrude, was convicted of murder and has since died. Paula pleaded guilty of involuntary manslaughter at just 17 years old.
It's bizarre that things like this happen.
Pace's past caught up with her last week when Grundy County Sheriff Rick Penning got a phone call about Pace's violent crime.
Our information was totally anonymous. We don't know whether it would have been somebody with a vendetta or just a curiosity or safety for the students, but they want to make sure that everybody's legit in the school system.
The sheriff told school administrators, and that's when Pace was suspended. Shocking news spread like wildfire.
It was just weird, I guess.
Why was it weird?
Because we're in basically the middle of nowhere. And everybody's like, well, I've always wanted something big to happen here, but we didn't really expect.
Be careful what you wish for.
No. I don't think that she should be working with children.
No shit. She definitely does not.
Kids understand that.
Apparently, the school board agrees. After meeting in a closed session Tuesday night, they voted to fire Pace.
I recommend that the Board of Education terminate the employment of Paula Pace effective immediately for providing false information on her application.
The board refused to answer questions about the controversy, questions about how this could have happened, and why Pace's killer passed went undiscovered for 14 years. One parent who showed up at the meeting hoped the BCLU administration has learned a lesson.
I would definitely like our schools to step up and make it mandatory to do background checks and fingerprints so that something like this does not happen. This had a good ending, but it could have been a very bad ending.
Now, we tried to ask what Pace lied about on her employment application with the school district, but the superintendent, Ben Petty, said neither he nor the board would have anything else to say about that tonight.
Well, Todd, any response from Pace?
Couldn't reach her for comment. She lives out of town and couldn't find her tonight.
Got to wonder, though, did Pace have any sort of a criminal record since the murder occurred so long ago?
You know, she didn't, Kevin. The sheriff we asked says that she was clean, and even some of the students we talked to say she was always very nice to them at school.
All right. Todd Megal, thanks.
Definitely someone that shouldn't be around children at fucking all. But yeah, Paula thought she could get by changing her name. But she also wanted to distance herself from her mother too. She never had contact with her mother. But during the trial as well, Paula did go into labor, and she did end up naming her daughter after her mother. So there was a bond there.
I mean, there was someone went to jail, but the problem is that the woman who, you know, she only did 20 years, and the others were too young, so obviously they got lighter sentences because of that. I mean, it's kind of like the Jinko case where the people who perpetrated that crime got off, actually are free and running around actually, and they tortured and killed a girl for for 40 days of hell basically. Actually, probably worse torture than we're hearing here today.
Yeah.
And they're free and they're running around. They're committing crimes all over Japan. So, yes, sometimes bad people do win and they do get out. I mean, they get to run around. You know.
And Paula was a teacher. Paula was a teacher for 14 years before she got caught. So she was around kids for 14 years.
Yeah. But yeah, 14 years having that psycho and teaching your kids, that's definitely not that's definitely not good. But anyway,
that's Sylvia Likens' story. If you want to read more upon her, please Google her. Just be prepared of the images. Do not look at them if you're not ready for them, but her images are posted everywhere, especially the crime scene. The house is demolished. It got demolished in 2009. So
yeah. And we kind of jumped over the actual trial a little bit, but you can read that. There's many videos that actually present it, but we wanted to get into the actual case and our thoughts on it, and and keep it in a 2-hour show type of deal. But there are videos that you can cover it, full great documentaries on it, and it is a good case to just look into. And it does brings you to that question. What is why do a group of people do evil things when you don't think they would? It's definitely a group think thing, and it's definitely interesting to see. But anyway, guys, you guys have a good one. I heard the Alex Murdoch verdict might be coming in. I'll probably be
y'all go to Queen Bee's. Is she doing anything?
I'm sure she'll be live. I'm sure everyone's going to be live at this point because it's a big deal. But thank you, everyone, for watching and rewatching, and I appreciate you all watching this. I know it's not our usual stuff, but we like to cover once in a while older cases, just, because we get interested in certain older cases. But anyway, you guys have a good one.
Yeah, and follow the grain. You're absolutely right. When you see something, say something. Y'all, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Grandma Sherry, for your help, for, modding help mod the channel. And y'all for joining us. Y'all keep safe out there, please. And we'll be back on Monday with something, a little bit uplifting.
Maybe we'll make fun of someone. Maybe we'll just do something. We may talk about an event going on. Maybe we'll talk about the balloons. Maybe we'll talk about the Chinese balloons. Who knows? We'll see.
The UFOs.
The UFOs. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We don't want to be a drunken turkey channel, though. We can't drink while doing it. But anyway, see ya.
See you guys. Have a good night. Keep safe.
Bye.